Hello, 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 and welcome once again to CorpusCast. As ever, I'm your host, Robbie Love, and I'm a linguist at Aston University. You're listening to the Aston Originals podcast, all about corpus linguistics and what it can do for society. Together, as always, we'll explore how corpus linguistics is informing the present and shaping the future of the study of language, with applications in education, health, and technology, among many others. Before we begin, I want to start this episode by paying tribute to a friend and colleague here at Aston who recently we very sadly lost, Dr Martin Pettico, a research associate in the Aston Institute for Forensic Linguistics and a brilliant corpus linguist. Martin was a much loved and respected member of the research community at Aston and beyond, and he made a substantial contribution to research at the intersection of forensic linguistics and corpus linguistics. My thoughts are with Martin's family, friends, and colleagues at this time, and this episode of CorpusCast is dedicated to him. Now, on to today's episode. Our topic is the application of corpus linguistics to research in business communication. For those watching us on video, you'll notice that for the first time in quite a while, we are back here live in the CorpusCast studios. That's not the official name, but that's what I like to call it anyway, here on the campus at Aston University. And that's because I'm thrilled that my guest today is joining us in person. So to tell me all about his research in business communication is Dr Matteo Fuoli, Associate Professor of Corpus-based Discourse Analysis at the University of Birmingham. Matteo's research combines corpus linguistic and experimental methods with discourse analysis to study the linguistic factors at the heart of important societal issues such as trust, polarization, and climate change. And these are some of the topics we'll be discussing in today's episode. So without any further ado, Matteo, welcome to CorpusCast. Thank you very much for coming to visit us here at Aston.
Thank you very much, Robbie. It's great to be here.
Well, it's great to have you. It's a rare treat, I must say, to have our guest live and in person. I'm not going to reach over and touch you, but just to prove that we are in the same room at the same time. And that's really very nice of you to come and visit us. So thank you. I want to start by asking you the question that I ask all of my guests here on CorpusCast. What does corpus linguistics mean to you?
Great. Good question to start off. I think I see corpus linguistics as a sort of magnifying glass that lets us peer into the fabric of language and discourse. So to me, corpus linguistics is this powerful yet flexible method that we can use to discover really interesting things about the way people communicate and patterns, including those patterns that might not be obvious at first sight. I really like the quantitative aspect of corpus linguistics. I find, like the numbers give me a sort of sense of validation for my claims, my observations, my conclusions. Numbers don't lie, right? They're there for everyone to see. And so I really enjoyed that aspect of doing corpus linguistic research. But I also see corpus linguistics as not just a purely quantitative method, right? It's not just about crunching numbers. To me, as a discourse analyst, primarily, as I think that's, as I see myself, the quantitative and the qualitative aspects of corpus linguistic research are equally important. And often, if you stop at the numbers, then you risk getting an incomplete and sometimes even a skewed picture of the texts that you're studying. One example, one case in point is a recent study that I've done together with a brilliant colleague from the Birmingham Business School, Annika Bielitz, where we looked at how large corporations are talking about climate change, as you were just anticipating earlier. And what we did is look at how these companies are discussing the issue of climate change, and when we looked at the frequencies and the keywords related to climate change, what we saw is that in recent years, there's been a real upsurge in discussion, in interest by companies in this topic. And that, if you stopped at that, you would think, oh, great, they're finally getting it. They've decided to do something about it. But then when we dug deeper and, painstakingly analyzed hundreds of concordance lines, then we discovered a whole world of like inconsistencies and contradictions, and even like subtle legitimating sort of strategies that these companies are using to essentially justify the status quo. So I think, to me, the beauty of corpus linguistics, especially when applied to the analysis of discourse, is that you kind of get the best of both worlds, both like the quantitative aspect that gives you a lot of like confidence in your results and solid empirical evidence, but also like the nuance that can only come from qualitative analysis.
So you're a discourse analyst, corpus linguist, and you've got your magnifying glass. I really like that metaphor. It's great. Yeah. You're a detective, you're trawling through millions of words of data. But how did you get to this point? What initially drove your interest in language? Because I'm sure I've said this to others on previous episodes before. It's very rare that I meet someone in this sort of line of work who woke up one day and said, that's what I want to do. So how did it happen for you? When did you first become interested in studying language and how people use language to get things done?
So I think looking back, first of all, I studied back in my hometown in the northeast of Italy, this really pretty mid-sized city in the middle of the Alps, and I did a BA and subsequently a 2-year MA in foreign languages for business and tourism. So it was like a kind of hybrid degree that combined the study of foreign languages with lots of modules in business and tourism studies, and that's where I first, got exposed to some of the research topics that I'm still interested in. But I think it wasn't until towards the end of my MA that I started really getting really excited about this. I think there were two, main factors. One was a really inspiring module taught by Professor Marina Bondi, who I'm sure a lot of the listeners will know and they'll be familiar with her work. That was a module on the language of business, and that's literally what set me off into the path I'm still in today, I guess. And then the other thing was I did a year abroad in Australia. So I went off to Australia to study there, and that's where I was exposed to things like systemic functional linguistics and appraisal theory that was really made a big impact in my own research. So that's when I decided, right, I really want to do this. This is fun. This is, exciting.
Yeah. And so you start with, learning about these various approaches and frameworks and theories, your interest in business communication. At what point did this scale up, so to speak, into becoming the detective with the magnifying glass, the corpus linguistics part? When did that happen for you?
I think it started when I was working on my MA dissertation, which later turned into my first publication. So I think I was really inspired by both of my supervisors. So my lead supervisor was Marco Baroni, sorry. So he's a superstar in the field of natural language processing, and he was so he had a real impact in my way of sort of thinking about language, and especially like from a methodological perspective. How do you go about studying language empirically and in a way that is systematic and as objective as possible? So I remember, so at the time I just come back from Australia, And I was really excited about discourse analysis and reading all about like appraisal theory and evaluative language, a lot of which is based on qualitative analysis, sometimes of like, single texts or just small collections of texts, very interpretive, which of course has its place. But then I would come to our supervision sessions, and he was like, at first, I think as a way of like helping me think more systematically about these things, more empirically, he was really challenging some of the things that I came up with in my own analysis, and pushed me to be as rigorous as possible. And that's where I think I got really into more quantitative methods and corpus linguistic techniques. And then I just, throughout my PhD, which I did in Sweden, in Lund, I also pursued that and read a lot about corpus-assisted discourse studies and tried to apply it into my own work.
Tell me about Lund then, because we recently had Carita Paradis,
right?
Also at Lund, Nella Poldvia, who also did her PhD at Lund.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
What was the Lund experience like for you?
The Lund experience was amazing. Truly life-changing. I don't think I would be here if it wasn't for that. And I think to a large part that's thanks to Carita Paradis, who was also my supervisor, and who is not only like a brilliant academic, so knowledgeable, and so so competent and wide-ranging in her interests, but also like the best supervisor I could hope for. Really, I owe her a lot in that way. Hugely supportive. Her door was always open. I could literally just pop by her office, and she made a lot of time for me, and also I think for all of her supervisees. So it was a fantastic experience all around, I would say. Lots of opportunities, lots of space to develop my own ideas, my own sort of, I guess, path, and to also do some teaching experience, to get some teaching experience, and to do many different things that are important for us, to develop as academics, I guess.
Gosh, we're getting to the point of CorpusCast being, I didn't mention earlier, this is our final episode of 2023, the end of our second year of CorpusCast. Apparently, CorpusCast is so old now that I'm starting to interview generations of the same academic carita your academic parent, if you will.
That's right. Yeah.
Carita Paradis, and now you. And yes, we're going to be getting the family tree of corpus linguists over the years. Gosh. That's great. And all of these things put together sort of have, helped you to get to the place you are now. You're obviously working at University of Birmingham, just down the road. And of course, our topic today, as I mentioned at the beginning, is your research in business communication. This is also sometimes referred to as corporate discourse, or maybe these aren't exactly the same, but I wonder if you could start just by maybe distinguishing what we mean when we're talking about corporate discourse and the kinds of contexts that you've studied.
Right. Yeah. I think, different scholars use these terms sometimes interchangeably. Sometimes they make a distinction, corporate discourse being more like outward facing institutional types of communication from large companies. Business communication tends to have a wider remit, if you like, including both written texts and multimodal texts produced by companies to communicate to outside audiences, but also communication that goes on in the daily operation of a company. So my research, if we keep that distinction, I'd say my research is mainly in the area of corporate discourse. So I'm interested in particular in how companies communicate to different audiences, how they use language strategically to achieve important organizational goals, such as building trust, such as positioning themselves with respect to important societal issues like climate change. And I think perhaps like when when people hear the terms business communication and corporate discourse, they might think, gosh, this sounds really like serious and a bit dull. But I find it absolutely fascinating. And there are two main reasons for this. First of all, the types of texts that companies produce are really carefully and skillfully crafted texts. So there are really competent professionals that work to create these texts. And so that means that there's a lot of really interesting rhetorical and linguistic stuff going on in these texts. And just selfishly, I just enjoy picking that apart. And I think it's quite fun to do in and of itself as an intellectual, if you like, activity. But I think there's a bigger motivation for doing this that I think is really important. And to me, corporate discourse is an important subject for research because it provides a window into really important and really powerful ideological forces that shape our society. Like, if you think about it, corporations are really powerful. They have a lot of financial resources. They have lobbying power. So what they say matters. What they say matters because it will influence and contribute to shaping what we all feel, the debate around important issues such as climate change, such as equality and gender issues, and all the rest of it. So I think by studying these texts, we can gain helpful insights potentially to learn how to reflect on how things could be done better. So I think that's on a broader societal level.
You mentioned earlier your recent paper, I think it's in the International Journal of Corpus Linguistics, looking at the responses of big corporations to the Paris Agreement in their sustainability reports. I wonder if you could say a little bit more about this study. Which sorts of corporations are we talking about here? And what are the sorts of ways that they are, presenting their role in a responsible future and moving towards net zero and these sorts of topics?
Yeah. So that's a study where, as I said before, my colleague Annika Bielitz and I looked at how the 100 top corporate polluters, so the most polluting companies, the companies that are responsible historically for the largest proportion of carbon emissions, are talking about climate change and carbon emissions in their sustainability reports. For those of you who are not familiar with these texts, these are official documents that most corporations produce and release every year, where they document what they're doing to address issues like climate change, but also other societal issues. And so what we were interested in doing in that study is exploring whether these companies have kept the pace of the evolving debate around climate change. Now, we know that a lot of these companies are, I should say, fossil fuel companies from Europe, America, but also from the Middle East and all over the world. And traditionally and historically, fossil fuel companies have been quite resisting to the idea of changing the way they do things. Of course, now we know, and it's undisputed that their products are the leading cause of climate change. Right. But for a long time, they've tried to obfuscate the truth. They've tried to, block the debate around these issues. And there are, there's evidence that companies like, for instance, ExxonMobil actually actively interfered with climate change regulation. They funded They funded climate denialist groups and campaigns and so on. So, a lot of that happened in the 80s and the 90s. And what we were interested in exploring in this paper is, has their discourse changed at all? Now that, the debate around it, the consensus around climate change is really changed. And I think, the Paris Agreement encapsulates that. It's the whole world saying, all right, this is happening. This is real. So what are we going to do about it? And so that was the motivation behind the study. And so we compiled a big corpus of these sustainability reports over a 10-year period, 5 years from 2011 to 2020. So 5 years before and 5 years after the Paris Agreement. And in that way, we set out to see whether there are any patterns, any changes in the way they talk about this.
How many reports are we talking about here?
So we're talking about several hundred reports. So not all of these 100 companies actually publish sustainability reports, which in and of itself is an interesting, I think, glimpse into their modus operandi and their thinking around these issues, how important they believe these things are. Over the 10-year period, you would have roughly 100 reports per year. So it's a sizable corpus, definitely. Yeah, and the reports are also quite extensive in some cases. So there's a lot of text.
And what are you I'm sort of zooming out and kind of Corpus Linguistics 101. You've got these hundreds of reports, presumably, in terms of words, we're into the hundreds of thousands, maybe millions at this stage. Yeah. Are you going in with a fixed kind of this is what we're looking for, or is it more of an exploratory approach? I mean, people talk about the deductive and kind of inductive kind of distinction. Which side of the fence would this approach fit on? And basically, I'm asking, what do you do?
What do you do with this?
What are you looking for
text?
to sort of help you answer your questions?
Right. I think so. First of all, we went into the corpus with a clear idea of what we wanted to test out. So we wanted to see one of the main questions, the driving question was, has the Paris Agreement had any effect on the way that these companies approach the subject of climate change and carbon emissions? And so for us, the natural first step was to compare the texts published before the Paris Agreement with those published after the Paris Agreement. So what we did as a starting point is a keyword analysis where we treated the texts before Paris as the reference corpus and the texts published after the agreement as the focus corpus. And so that enabled us to see what the dominant sort of themes were in the texts published after the agreement, and to gauge the extent to which climate-related issues were an important topic, right? Which we found it was. So as I mentioned at the start, like you see, there are a lot of the keywords are related to climate change and carbon emissions. But we didn't stop there, because as I said before, that would just give you a very rough and ready and partial picture of the discourse. So we use that as the foundation to then go to, if you like, direct our attention to salient bits of language, which we then further explored more in depth using concordance analysis and collocate analysis. So just to give you an example, one of the findings that stood out was the use of the word zero in the reports published after the agreement. That came up as a keyword, as a significant keyword, and so we looked further into it, and it turns out, predictably, it's used a lot in the phrase net zero. So there's a lot of talk of net zero in the reports after Paris. And so then what we did is examined random concordance lines containing that phrase to, with the help of Van Lowen's legitimation framework, to see how are these companies framing the goal of net zero, of reaching carbon neutrality. What kind of solutions are they discussing to get there? And also, we use also collocate analysis to help us with that. To get a more complete sort of sense of the function of this phrase. And we did that for other words that we thought would carry, an important sort of meaning and played an important role in that discourse.
So with net zero, again, just treat me as a complete novice in all of these, but my understanding is that is essentially companies committing that eventually at some point in the maybe distant future, they will no longer be, producing excess or releasing excess carbon into the environment, CO2 into the environment, so that what they offset will make up for what they produce, right?
That's right.
I sense from what you're saying, where we're going is that they talk about it as, yes, we'll do it later, but what are they doing right now? Is that kind of what you found?
I think that was something that came out quite clearly from the analysis, especially this additional follow-up collocate and qualitative concordance analysis of the phrase net zero. It's quite striking when you look at the concordance list the collocate list of net zero. You see a lot of journey metaphorical language. You see a lot of desiderative words like ambition or aspiration. So, I mean, it does beg the question of how serious they are about this, right? And so I think the general discourse around net zero really is quite non-committal. And dare I say, wishy-washy. You also have empirical research that we didn't do, but we draw on in our analysis that shows that actually there's a huge disconnect between the pledges that these companies are making in terms of net zero and what the amount of investment that they've put into renewable energy, for instance, right? So you will see a lot of companies talking about renewable energies and investment in these technologies that are vital for us to get to that goal of carbon neutrality. But then these investments are, according to this other research that we are incorporating into our own, dwarfed by the continued investment in fossil fuels. So I think that was a striking kind of and discouraging to some extent finding, right? But important finding nonetheless, I think, to really raise a red flag about these issues.
Yeah, absolutely. And that comes out, very clearly. I'm going to read to you a quote, which is actually the final couple of lines of the paper that we're talking about here. You say here, looking back at over 20 years of research on corporate discourse of climate change, we find the same kind of aspirational talking points being repeated endlessly, while global carbon emissions keep rising. Aspirational talk is cheap unless followed by action. And that does seem to be, in the context of what can linguists do to try and raise red flags, as you said, getting your magnifying glass out and taking your hundreds of reports, your millions of words, and looking over a period of time. It seems that, the empirical kind of benefit of corpus linguistics in this context seems to be a way of trying to sort of more effectively hold corporations to account, I suppose. Reminding them of their words, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think to some extent, it's also a way of hopefully informing debates and informing policy, right? I'm when it comes to climate change, of course, we all as individuals need to do our bit, and that's no way around it. But I think corporations have huge leverage, and their investment decisions are going to have a massive impact on whether we will be able to deal with this crisis or not. So I think hopefully, I think the general goal, the wider goal, if you like, is to provide, if you like, insights that can then inform those conversations and I don't know, empower also the environmental movement, NGOs working in this general sort of area to really like bring home the message, like we need to be more serious about this, right? What we find in these reports is a lot of legitimation, especially like not all of the companies. I mean, it's a very fragmented picture that emerges from our analysis. There are some companies that are more serious about this, or this appear to be more serious about this than others. Like, for instance, European oil and gas majors like Shell and BP do foreground this theme of investment in renewables a lot more than US companies. And US companies, for instance, they still justify the use of gas as a relatively cleaner fossil fuel. They would use pragmatic legitimation to say, actually, energy consumption and energy demand is going to keep growing. So fossil fuels are still going to be part of the energy mix for a long time. And I think that's the crux of it. Like, if we're serious about it, we should rethink the whole thing and definitely move away from fossil fuels entirely.
And presumably the elephant in the room, really. And again, I'm naive, relatively, but I'm guessing that what we're talking about in terms of what you might perceive to be a resistance or lackadaisical approach to yes, that's very interesting, we'll do it later, but we can't do it right now. We can't do it right now, but presumably it's all about profits, and
that's right.
It's not as profitable to transition. Just to pick up on that, I watched yesterday, happened to watch this Channel 4 report into some of the major oil companies. I can't remember the details now, but the gist of it was that they've been able to, through sort of prank Zoom meetings with some of the executives from these massive oil and gas conglomerates, they were able to discover that essentially these companies are now aiming to boost the sale of internal combustion engines in developing countries in Africa as a way of propping up the sale of fossil fuel products. Now that, of course, a lot of countries are trying to move away from them. So it's and you set that against the rhetoric that you find in these reports, and that's quite disturbing. And it really does, I think, make you question how trustworthy this particular form of communication is. Right? And I'm glad you mentioned trustworthy, because I'm going to ask you about trust in a moment. But I'm actually going to ask you something I was going to ask at the end, but I'm going to ask it now. You mentioned about, going from, you've done a study and obviously you've done numerous studies on this and other topics, but let's take this, we'll stick with this example for now. You publish this paper and you're sat there with your magnifying glass in one hand and your red flag in the other, waving them around and going, "Hey, listen, come on!" But I've very much been in this situation where you publish a paper, I'm going to change the world, and then the paper goes out, and then nothing happens, or it doesn't, or maybe things do happen, but you don't know about them, or people, or it happens really slowly and incrementally, and there isn't necessarily that moment of boom, yes, okay, we're going to run with that. So, I think what you said is very sensible in terms of it's not necessarily about sort of attempting or sort of endeavoring to, this one study is everyone's going to turn around and go, "Oh, you were right. Oh my goodness, I had no idea," because I don't know how, aware these corporations are of this sort of research that's being done about what they say and whether they take that sort of thing seriously. And maybe you can say something about that in a second. But how do you, this is a broader question, I suppose, in terms of the journey from research in isolation and publishing your findings to impacts and informing policy, as you mentioned, working with NGOs. What do you see as those routes? I'd like to hear a little bit more about how can this and other examples of corpus research around climate change, how can it get in to sort of make some kind of tangible difference? What do you see those pathways to impact, so to speak, to use a term that's quite popular in the research? Pathways to impact. Yes.
Yeah, it's a real soundbite thing.
Yes, it is.
Especially British academia.
Yeah, very much so. It's in there for some. I didn't make it up. It's in there somewhere for some reason. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're spot on. I mean, writing a paper in a way is the easiest thing that we can do, right? And it's also like the thing that we've been trained to do, and something that I guess matters to us, and that I think has some potential and is important. But it definitely is not the end goal. It doesn't stop there, right? So I think there are more effective ways of creating change, and but they're harder, right? Much harder. And I think one pathway to impact is partnering up with organizations like NGOs, charities, even government departments, or even enlightened companies that really do want to take this seriously, right? And so I think we've seen really excellent work being done in other areas. I'm thinking, the work by Elena Semino, Gavin Brooks, people who have really developed entire projects with a strong impact component there. And I think that's a really great model, but it's hard. It's hard work. It's hard to, of course, like getting funding for this is always really competitive, but we should keep trying. I think that's a really important way forward. And the other thing is we really should try to break through the academic ceiling kind of thing and break into the public debate around these issues. And I think what you're doing is great, because I think, it helps get the word out. So I think as linguists, we should make an effort to take every opportunity to communicate our research in accessible, hopefully engaging ways, in ways that, people can, I guess, feel like drawn into and engaged and, hopefully, so that is another important way of trying to promote positive change and greater awareness around these important issues.
Well, it's all thanks to you and all the other guests we've had so far for making this happen. Otherwise, it would just be me talking to myself, which nobody wants to hear. But no, I absolutely agree. And I want to circle back now. You mentioned trust before, because it's not a totally separate topic, because, in any of these public communications, presumably these corporations want the readers to trust what they're saying and believe that their intentions are sincere. But you have kind of separately studied trust in corporate discourse as well. And clearly this is something, that is important. So maybe this is a difficult question to answer, but I'm going to ask it anyway. What are, if there is such a thing as the sort of typical linguistic strategies for getting people to trust what you're writing in your sustainability report, or whatever it is that these big companies are putting out? Are there sort of patterns that corpus research that you've done has revealed that seem to appear time and time again as appearing to be, yes, this is a way that they want the reader to trust what they're saying? That's
right. Yeah. So I think, your initial point is very true. Companies need people to trust them, right? And like trust is such an important, they call it intangible asset for companies, because if a company is trusted, they will have an easier time attracting customers, attracting talent, and attracting investment. So it's really crucial. And there's also an issue of legitimacy at stake, right? So a company needs societal support to be able to continue to operate freely and to essentially use collective resources in the form of, labor and natural resources for profit. So I think trust is an important element of that. Like, if we don't trust the company, if we feel that the company is rogue and trying to manipulate us all the time, then eventually there will be enough, public resistance towards them that it might even cause the business to collapse. People will start boycotting the company, and we've seen it time and time again. So one of the questions that I've been interested in my work is, how do large companies use language as a tool for building trust? So I've done different bits of research on this, but one of the more corpus-y kind of studies that I've done is one where I used Biber's stance framework to study how these companies use evaluative language to craft a trustworthy corporate persona. So the reason for focusing on evaluative language is that it's such an important resource for expressing our identity, for expressing who we are, what we like, what we don't like, what our values are, and it's also an important resource for managing interpersonal relationships. So I think there's a direct connection between evaluative language, which we study using the Biber stance framework, and the construct of trust. And so in that particular study that came out like a couple of years ago in Applied Linguistics, I built another quite large corpus of annual financial reports and sustainability reports published by a sample of large multinationals from different sectors. And the idea was to see whether these companies are essentially tuning their language to optimize it for the audiences that they are addressing. So in the case of financial reports, they are mainly talking to investors. In the case of sustainability reports, it's a wider audience, including, you and me. And so I was interested in looking at how are they using evaluative language strategically. And what I found is that there is really a different approach in these two genres. In annual reports, they tend to use less stance, and I interpret that as an attempt to convey a more objective sort of attitude towards the information that they are providing. They're also using a lot of tentativeness markers. So displaying caution and sort of a responsible approach to decision making, and that's really something that investors value a lot. So it's about creating a sense of competence and a sense of careful decision making. When they're talking to the general public in sustainability reports, they use a lot more explicit evaluative language to come across as excited and committed about, the big ideals of sustainability and equality and so on. They use words, epistemic markers like know and understand a lot to convey a sense that they're listening, that they are, that they care about what people think and feel and their priorities. So it's a strikingly different kind of rhetorical mode, if you like, that they deploy in these texts. And when you then interpret that through the lens of well-established trust theories, what we can say is that in annual reports, there's more emphasis on ability, which is one key component of trust, whereas in sustainability reports, it's more about communicating ethical principles, honesty, and benevolence, which is this idea that they genuinely care about us.
And my final question before we move to the quick question, so it's not actually my final question, but my final question on this topic before we wrap up. Do you think it works?
Well, I think it does actually, and I have the evidence to prove it.
Here we go.
So that's an important question. So when we're doing corpus research like this into the rhetorical aspects of a particular kind of discourse, in this case, corporate discourse, we can only get so far. We can only say, okay, this is potentially a trust-building feature. Mm-hmm. This is what appears to be, or what is manifestly sometimes, like an attempt to convey trust. But linguistic description alone cannot tell us whether those linguistic choices actually have an effect on people's thoughts, feelings, attitudes towards those companies in this case. Mm-hmm. So I think that's why I'm a huge fan of combining corpus analysis and discourse and qualitative discourse analysis with experiments, because experiments allow you to take that next logical step of looking at the effects that certain linguistic choices have. So in a paper, a follow-up paper to this particular study on stance that I did together with Chris Hart from Lancaster, we actually tested out some of these linguistic strategies. And we tested out those strategies in the context of controversy. So we set up a scenario where a pharmaceutical company is accused of having bribed doctors to prescribe their own very expensive medicines instead of cheaper, white brand alternatives. Generics. Yeah, that's right. And so what we wanted to see is whether people who are exposed to what we call trust-building strategies get fooled by them. Right.
Oh, this is good.
And so that's a way of looking into the dark side of trust, how language can be used to manipulate. And the results are, we're quite, if you like, bleak, because we did find that we split the participants into two groups, and we gave one group of participants we showed them a text in the form of a fabricated website that included some of those stance features, including the knows and understands and the intentions and expressions of intentions and desires and so on, designed to portray the company in a positive light. And then we gave the other group, and the other group of participants did not see that text before both groups saw and read the newspaper article accusing the company. And then we gave participants a bunch of questions designed to measure their trust in the company and compare the scores across the two groups. And the results showed that the participants that had read the website containing all these persuasive strategies were more likely to consider the company trustworthy and to believe the company's denial of the accusations. So I think that again, I think shines a light on the power of language. I think not just to be used it can be used as a source of good, obviously, but in this case, since we're taking a more of a critical discourse analytical perspective on this, it can also be used to deceive and manipulate, and we should be very cognizant of that. And I think that's an important thing for all of us to acknowledge and to keep in mind, I guess.
I think so, absolutely, and a cautionary tale.
That's right.
It reinforces what you found in the original study, right? Which is brilliant. Not brilliant, but you know what I mean.
I know.
Yeah, it does strengthen the discourse, the corpus, the qualitative work that you're doing to sort of feed into all of that stuff. Thank you so much. We're gonna come to a close now as our time is drawing near. as always, I like to finish our conversations with some quick questions. Although I realize somebody ever did a linguistics study of the construction of these quick questions, they would tell me off because they are not designed really to have quick answers.
That's right.
Although I'm getting better because 2 out of the 3 of them are now yes/no questions, which they never used to be. So
amazing.
We'll see if we can see how quick your answers are. Quick question number 1. Is research in corpus linguistics living up to its potential? I said the eyebrow. It's great.
No, I think that's a tough question to answer.
I know,
as a yes or no.
And it's just a shame that I'm the one asking. I never have to answer it myself. Yeah.
I think I want to say yes. I think there's a lot of exciting stuff going on, especially like in the CADS space. I think, a lot of really, really impactful work being done. Like, I remember the first corpus linguistic conferences I attended, more than a decade ago now. There wasn't nearly as much CADS work as there is today.
We're talking about corpus-assisted
discourse studies. Sorry, yes. So corpus-assisted discourse studies covering such a wide range of really important topics, like we mentioned healthcare before, but also like, issues around gender and the manosphere online, like forensic kind of linguistic topics as well. So I think whether, of course, there's always more that we could do, right? But I feel like it's such a now a mature field, and corpus linguistics is really, I feel, been effectively incorporated into a lot of other paradigms that didn't used to use it. So I think, I want to say yes to
Good.
that.
And it's so nice to hear you say that corpus linguistics is a mature field, because I still feel like, and I've said this before previously, but I do feel like sometimes we find ourselves still talking about it as if it's this newfangled thing that nobody knows anything about.
It's been around a while now.
It's been around for a while. Yeah, I think we can call it mature. I like that. Yes. Good. Okay. Quick question number 2. What is your number 1 piece of advice for students who are new, beginning their journey into corpus linguistics, new to corpus research?
Gosh, tricky one. I think I would give them the same advice I give to a lot of my supervisees at different levels, which is a very general kind of advice. I think about your research question. I think because it's, in a way, thanks to the brilliant tools that we have available, like Anconc and Sketch Engine, it feels like doing the descriptive analysis is quite easy, right? At times. I mean, not always, but, relatively easy. But often, I think I see some of the students I've worked with, at least initially, they fall into the trap of just like getting really engrossed in the data without necessarily thinking big picture. So what is the burning question that you have? What is your argument? What do you want to find out? And why does it matter? I think that is something that is just really important to think carefully about, especially in the early stages of setting up a PhD project, for instance.
Very good advice. Thank you. Finally, it's I should say refreshing to hear an answer that isn't learn how to code, because that is a common answer. But I think absolutely. I'm a strong proponent. That the method should emerge from the research question rather than the other way around. Finally, and I was lying when I said that 2 of them were yes/no questions. Only 1 of them was, actually. So here you go. Another open-ended question for you.
Nice.
What will corpus research look like in 50 years?
50 years. Wow. I think, instinctively, it might be, at this point, it sounds a little bit like a cliche, right? But I think AI will take over the field, just like it's taking over our lives. Yeah. And I think, but there's a lot of promise in that. So I think AI will enable us to do more sophisticated kind of analysis more efficiently, and do things that we cannot do today. As a case in point, I was just involved in a research project with some colleagues from China, where we tested out ChatGPT as a robotic annotator. We devised a protocol for using ChatGPT to annotate the pragmatic components of apologies. And the results are really good. The coding scheme is quite simple, so it's more of a proof of concept than anything else. But I think, given the pace that this technology is advancing at, I think we'll get to a point where we'll be able, for instance, to create pragmatically coded corpora, not in the far distant future, I don't think, quite soon, really quickly and really cost efficiently, if you like, right? You know much better than I do how complicated the kind of annotation work is, and I think so I'm looking forward to that. So I think AI is going to be transformative for the field for sure.
I think there's potential from what you're saying, and I agree. An equity which doesn't yet exist in terms of the size and scale of corpora of different genres. There's a huge imbalance, it's well documented imbalance, for example, between spoken and written genre, things like that. But I certainly agree that I see the opportunity that the sort of scale that we only really see with these, massive scraped web corpora, which are well into the billions. We don't really see that with too many other domains or genres of language, because of these practical barriers
hurdles,
to building, gathering, and processing the data. And I think you're absolutely right that hopefully we'll see the scale catch up with all of these other relatively underrepresented genres in terms of the, just how much data we can process. Well, let's catch up again in 50 years and find out.
Sounds great.
If you were right. Matteo, thank you so much. It's been such a brilliant, chance to get to talk to you and such an interesting conversation. Thank you, especially for coming face to face, meeting us here in CorpusCast Studios. Sam's going to tell me off for keeping calling it that. It's the Aston Originals Studios. But we will bring things to a close there. You may be relieved to hear. Congratulations, you've survived.
Yay!
But yes, that is all the time we have for this episode of CorpusCast. Thank you for joining us on your platform of choice, be that YouTube or Spotify or wherever it is that you get your monthly dose of CorpusCast. In the meantime, do let us know your thoughts using the hashtag CorpusCast, and make sure to check out the Aston Corpus Linguistics Research Group on X, as it's now known, of course, at Aston Corpus, and you can follow me at Lovermob. CorpusCast is an Aston Originals podcast, written and hosted by me, Robbie Love, and produced by Sam Cook. Thanks again for listening. We'll see you in 2024. And thank you once again, Matteo Fuoli, for joining me today.
Thank you, Robbie. It's been great. Thank you.